First, a little bit about how this topic came up. I'm on the the State Bar of Georgia Wellness Committee and the Lawyers Living Well Committee, and because I have such a professional focus in wellness, we were just going about our regular course of business and trying to come up with content and a delivery schedule for the members of the State Bar. There we go. Muted. If I hear an echo, I may ask you to mute. Okay, I'm unmuted now. And in doing that, because I think, when you serve on a committee, especially, you've got your plate full with all of the daily practice pressures that you have and deadlines that you have, and then you're trying to serve with your pro bono activity as well. We found ourselves kind of running up against tight deadline after tight deadline after tight deadline. And so I just was observing how this behavior that all of us are so well trained to do and how responsive we are in our lives to people, how that overflows into other areas of our lives, and how much additional stress and pressure this creates in our lives that we just don't even realize it. And we don't even realize it because for some very good reasons that I'm going to get into in a second. But the thing that's really important to remember is that these kind of habits happen incrementally. So every time we say yes to something, it's a series of tiny little yeses that add up. And over the course of a year, I mean, it could even be a day or a week, but certainly over the course of a career or many years, what we don't realize is how much more we're adding to our plate every time we say yes to something else, and how we are stretching ourselves beyond our capacity just because we can do it and handle it. So this part of the reason for this today is for us to kind of hit the pause button and just take a moment to start a conversation and evaluate how this is truly affecting you in not just your professional area of your life, but in all the other areas of your life. I've got Plowman. I teased him a little bit before we started, but he's our resident expert on the integrative model of living, and we've featured his articles in the Georgia Bar Journal. But in all the areas of our life, we have to remember it's social and mental and emotional well-being and physical well-being and the work part of our well-being as well. So there are all these different components to our well-being. And when we say yes to last-minute requests, it has a ripple effect into all those different areas. And when we say yes to them, we want to begin to realize that we're saying no to something else, no to something else for ourselves, no in another area of our life. And this isn't a bad thing to do or a good thing to do. It's just something that has a natural consequence. And if we can begin to retrain ourselves from being just reflexive with that yes, then we can begin to evaluate what the repercussions, right? What the natural consequences of that saying yes is in the rest of our lives. Where does saying yes to that, where does that show up as saying no to something else in our lives? So just beginning to kind of give yourself a little bit of space and opportunity to really evaluate what's going on. Now, I want to talk first about why it's so hard to say no to other people. Why do we say yes to things that we may not have the time for? So understanding that this just goes back to it's a trait and a pattern that has developed over the course of our evolution as human beings. And particularly that part of human development when we were living kind of in a tribal communities. And so when we began to divide labor and share responsibilities, we began to rely on a culture of reciprocity, right? So we help one another. Yes, I'll help you do this and you help me do that. And that became a very important part of the survival of our immediate community and a part of survival for future generations. It's one of the reasons why you're here today, because your ancestors began to say yes and began to share responsibilities for things. So don't underestimate the underlying survival mechanism involved as driving you to say yes to things versus saying no to things. It really does light up that part of your brain, that amygdala part of your brain, that you are inclined from an evolutionary perspective to say yes. So this is one reason it's so hard to say no and feel good about it, because it rises to the level of almost a threat in that part of the brain. So that's the first part I want you to realize. It's really an evolutionarily ingrained pattern that favorable, that culture of reciprocity. The second thing I want us to ground ourselves in is that as lawyers and as a profession, this is also something that we do really well. We respond to last minute requests all the time. And not only do we respond to them, we excel at them. And so when someone asks us to do something, it gives us a bit of a hit, of almost a dopamine hit, like, yeah, I can get that done. I can get that done for you. And then on the other side of it, we're thinking about, one, I'm capable of doing it. Yes, I can do it. I get a little bit of a rush from doing it. And we're thinking about all those immediate things, and we're not thinking about, again, what the cost is of that on the other side of it. And so this is a phrase that you might want to just make a mental note of, or write down on a piece of paper and Google when you have a moment. But it's a phrase that's coming up more and more in psychology circles of over-functioning, over-helping, and over-functioning. So again, we're not saying that saying yes is a bad thing to everything, but understanding when you're crossing the line in your life for that helping you and being a way of helping you to function in your life, and then where that line is being crossed and you are over functioning, right? So something that's a functional response becomes a dysfunction for us in our lives. And that's really the purpose behind this topic today, is to begin to say, oh yeah, if this is an area of dysfunction for me, right? If I'm over functioning when I say yes, it's going to help me build the case for saying no in more situations. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to do for ourselves. We're going to have to start learning how to build the case to say no so that we can feel good about it. And when we understand there's a cost to saying yes all the time, it helps alleviate that feeling of guilt that we have in saying no. So the reasons why it's so hard to say no, the evolutionarily evolved, for a culture of reciprocity. Number two, professionally, we're trained to do it. And then there's just this role that I think from a personality wise that a lot of lawyers and overachievers have, that we can come in and save the day. Don't underestimate that role that you identify with as being a rescuer. And this is another area that we can help build the case for ourselves for feeling better about saying no. That when we can evaluate the situation and stop and say, if I'm coming in to rescue or save a situation, of course, that feels good to me from an identity standpoint, but is it really helping the person on the other end? Am I building a codependent relationship? Am I teaching them how to be self-sufficient? Am I teaching them the proper boundaries of when it's okay and when it's appropriate to ask, me to do something last minute and when it's not? So here's another reason why that we can put in our column of reasons that saying no can feel better than saying yes, is because we frame it in the bigger picture, right? We frame our one behavior into a bigger picture of, is this going to be helpful to this person in the long run if I keep responding to these last minute requests, right? I'm just training them to think I'm the person who's always available for last minute requests. And would I rather train them to answer their own questions and do things for themselves, or look up a resource for themselves and then use me as a resource in other situations? And in that building of that bigger case for this, you can also see how this allows you to reserve your energy, your intellectual and mental and emotional energy, and save it for the bigger projects that we need to save our minds for. I mean, we're in a profession that is dependent upon the clarity of our thought. And when we are always saying yes to things, and especially at the last minute, we're not giving our brains the space to rejuvenate itself and to rest and relax. We're requiring our brains to always be on. And eventually, we will pay a price for that. That creates stress in our life. It drops adrenaline and cortisol in our system. So really just being able to frame, every little tiny situation that comes up, if we can take a moment to frame it in the bigger picture of things, it will help us move us and ease us into the willingness to risk saying no in situations. So this second this second part of the equation is, how do we start to say no, right? That was that part was why it's so hard to say no. But given that, and given the fact if we want to change things, then how do we start to say no and feel good about it? And this is a good news, bad news part of the conversation today. The good news is it's 100% possible to learn to say no and feel good about it. The bad news is the way to get there, the way to feeling good, is to start to say no and be willing to feel bad about it. It really is the way that we start. It's just with that tiny little willingness. And again, you have to remember this evolutionary part of us. That's a real risk that this old evolutionary part of us, our physical body, feels like. It's a true risk to say no, because we think, oh, all the things that run through our mind. Well, they've done so much for me before. I have to be able to say yes to them, or I might need something from them in the future. Like all of these things are going through our minds. And those are the things that we need to be able to listen to and understand, because if we can take a moment to listen to those things, those thoughts running through our mind, we can begin to say, okay, where is that thought coming from? Oh, yeah, this is coming from my conditioning of the necessity of living in a reciprocal culture, right? Um, or we can see that if I want to do it because I want to be seen as the hero or the rescuer, right? We can begin to understand what's driving us. And when we begin to understand what's driving us, then we can say, okay, but the bigger picture is my wellness, right? The bigger picture is the time that I want to spend with my family at home today, right? The bigger picture is just simply maybe resting. The bigger picture could be, physical health. It could be time that I could go for a run. So then we can frame it in the bigger picture. What else could I do with this time? And again, you can see I'm just building a case for feeling good about saying no. I'm using all of our lawyer skills that we have, making this a very natural thing for us to do as lawyers, to say, if I'm going to learn how to say no and feel good about it, I'm going to have to make a case for myself as to why I can feel good about it. And so these things that I'm sharing with you today are just some places to get started for yourself as to where you can begin to build this case. So other questions that you can ask yourself, right, while you're giving yourself this opportunity to evaluate, while you're exploring building this case, you can ask yourself, am I being overly helpful? Could someone else do this? Am I over functioning? Am I creating a codependent relationship here? Will this ultimately create, if I say yes to this, because remember, we're saying yes because we don't want to feel bad about saying no in these situations. That's really the takeaway. We're saying yes because we don't want to feel bad about saying no in the moment. So will saying yes ultimately create more stress or more peace in my life? Will saying yes and not no in this situation, what is the effect it's going to have on other areas of my life? How much time will this really take? This is a place that we generally underestimate, because we're usually saying yes to last minute requests that we know we can do, right? Like, I know I can do that. But what we don't take into consideration is mapping out all the additional things that it's going to take to do it, right? Like, I know I can give this webinar today. I know I can teach this today, but I've never taught to this group before. You don't know me. I teach all the time with a group of people twice a week, but those people are my clients and I teach them and we have a rapport. So when I say yes to doing this, the teaching part's going to become quick, but then how I begin to think and prepare about it, prepare for it in my mental and emotional state of how am I going to make a connection with them? What's going to be relevant for this specific audience that I don't always teach, right? These are the tiny little things that we often don't take into consideration, that why this is a little bit more than what I might think it is. Am I more worried? I love this question. about disappointing others than I am about disappointing myself. Really think about that and really weigh it. Am I more concerned about disappointing others than disappointing myself? Learning to say no and feeling good about it requires a willingness to disappoint other people so that you don't disappoint yourself. You have to begin to say, oh, I'm building self-trust. Like I am the person that always has my back. I know what I can do. I know what my limitations are. I know where I excel, and I know where it's too much. Now, the flip side of this one that really, really helps me is that when I'm worried about disappointing someone else and I don't say no and I say yes, I haven't disappointed them in the moment. But I also am more likely to disappoint them in the future if I didn't have the capacity to really do it, if I didn't really think it through. So oftentimes, when we don't say no immediately, we are deferring the discomfort to the future, right? And we're creating more stress and that putting of that ultimate, I need to say no off. And to me, that was a way that was very helpful. We're going to talk a little bit about this at the end after your questions and answers, a little bit of a challenge for yourself. But one time I challenged myself to do a year of no. And one of the things that I began to look at, I was being asked to serve on various boards and committees. And the reason why I was asked to do that, just like the reason you're asked to do that, is because you're very capable. You know, you're good in that role, and everybody knows that they can depend upon you in that role. But what I began to see was I had to talk myself into make the case for what my capacity was beyond that. You know, was I going to be available to do the fundraising part or the letter writing part or the baking cookies part, whatever it is. And that my yes would be blocking someone else who was more available that may just not be as obvious, right? But am I blocking someone else who could serve this organization better than I could serve it? So I gave myself this point of turning this disappointment around to my reverse sales pitch to them was, I've got to tell you no. One, I fell back on this pre-decision. I've taken a year of no, and I'm just not saying yes to anything right now. And we'll talk about that as a strategy. It's really helpful. But number two, I said, given all that I have on my plate right now, I'm not going to be able to serve you 100%. And you're going to be served at such a higher level if you find someone else to do it. And so now I've turned this, you know, not pushing the disappointment later off, right? Just telling them at the beginning, they're going to be better served with someone else doing it. And then here's a really helpful kicker for those of us who hate disappointing other people. We begin to not only build self-trust within ourselves, but self-trust in our community or the people that we work for, that when we say yes, it is a considered yes, and we're going to be all in. They can 100% depend upon us to do that. So let's see, someone say they have to leave. Will there be a link? Yes, there will be a link to the recording for later. So go in peace if you have to leave. Say no to the rest of this and feel good about it, because you can go to it. So these Or kind of when you are willing to begin to set out on this adventure of learning to say no to requests, and feel good about it. This is the type of inquiry process that is involved that will get you to that place of feeling good about it, so that when you say no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a challenge. When you get through your own, check yourself to see, do I really have the capacity to do this, right? Is this going to create more stress in other areas of my life, or more? One strategy that I touched upon that is helpful to me is, when I'm in the heat of the moment, making some pre-decisions for myself. I touched upon that on my year of no, because it became this thing. I was just like, I'm taking a year of no. I'm just saying no to anything that's not on my plate. I'm going to clear everything up, and then I'm going to reevaluate, and giving myself the space to do that. So you might not want to go to a year of no, but you could ask yourself right now, what's one tiny decision you could make for yourself right now, while you're not in the heat of the moment, right? Not under the activated stress response of someone asking you to do something, that you could make right now that would make your life easier, or make it easier to say no for you. So I'll give you a little hint. In the title of this talk is how to say no to last minute requests and feel good about it. You could make this tiny little leap of, okay, I'm just going to say no to a request that any request that comes my way that requires an immediate response, right? Or a 24-hour turnaround, or help over the weekend. Like some rule that works for you. Now, I'm going to anticipate, in anticipating questions, we want to keep this easy. So I'm not talking about the hard thing where a client calls you and says, I need this immediately, and they truly need that. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about if you're a junior associate and your senior partner is like, you have to do this. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something much easier than that, right? I'm talking about an add-on, an extra thing, okay? Because we want to make this doable for you. I don't want you to feel the stress and the angst of keeping your rule and keeping, your job, because that's going to create more stress. Just some tiny little area that you can go ahead and make a pre-decision for yourself. Okay. Is my audio, somebody just said the audio's cutting out from time to time.
It's fine now. It was
okay
earlier. You're
All
okay
right.
now. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so go ahead and make a pre-decision for yourself. And then give yourself a little time in which you can try it on and evaluate, right? Like maybe give yourself 30 days to just try this on and see how it works, and begin to get to know yourself. What am I internally bumping up against in myself, like feeling that feeling, right, of discomfort in the saying no? And then with practice, it becomes easier. I promise you, it becomes easier. You just have to know you're so much more practiced, and you have all this evolution behind you to say yes, or if you say no, to feel guilty about it, than you do in saying no and feeling good about it. That's it. You just don't have the skill, right? You haven't mastered it yet, but you can't master it. You can't change the situation if you're not willing to start it, right? If you're not willing to feel that discomfort. And on the evolutionary front of this thing, part of it is just training your body that you can say no and that you're not going to die. Like you can feel the feeling of disappointing another human being and not dying. Your body really does think that, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be, left behind by the rest of the herd, right? I'm like, these do not underestimate the strength of these base survival instincts that we have. So you have to begin to train your body and say, okay, we didn't die. That might have been hard, but we did it and we stuck to it. And you have to go back to building the case for yourself, like intentionally reminding yourself why you're doing it so that you can get to the eventual goal of it feeling better saying no more than feeling worse saying no. All right, I have just downloaded a bunch of stuff for you guys, and I want to open it up. I was going to ask Plowman if there are things that have stuck for him that he might want to jump on or elaborate on, or if you have any questions, please. Amber, I don't know if you have any questions in the Q&A.
You can post a question in the chat box,
Okay.
and so everyone can see it. If you'd like to send an anonymous question, you can send it to me or to Tara directly, and we can read your question aloud without your name attached. Or you can raise your hand.
Yeah.
So I will share that I really appreciate how completely and from how many different perspectives you're inviting us to look at this question, Tara, because you mentioned and you explained very clearly that this seemingly small thing involves many aspects of ourselves. It involves our biology, our relationships, the mental constructs that we habitually operate in, and the professional impact. So there are multiple areas that are implicated by this small question, which by practicing a different type of answer to the small question has the potential to impact all of these different dimensions and to strengthen and expand our capacity in all of these different dimensions. And I also really appreciate you took out of the equation completely the most threatening types of situations in which we realistically do not have the ability to say no, or saying no has too high a cost to pay, and therefore it's not meaningful. It's not even something we should go toward at this point.
Right.
And so,
oh, sorry, Plowman. We have a. Are you finished with your thought? Or?
I'm finished for now. So I'll add on later. But I just wanted to give a chance for people to start sending questions. So
yes. So we have a couple anonymous questions. The first one is it best to offer an explanation or an excuse with the no, or is it best to just be firm without the explanation? I hate to sound like a whiner.
So I would give yourself some space to master the art of saying no. I would also, so I would say, okay, first of all, doing this work of really grounding yourself and asking yourself the question of why saying no, making the case for saying no being something better for you and better for everybody else. So that what you've done is you've grounded yourself and you've reclaimed your authority in the situation. So that when you deliver the no, you are delivering the no from a firm and sturdy leadership position versus delivering the no from a place of needing permission from the other person. You can feel the difference in your body. Now, again, this is going to just take practice. So I say, be willing to fail at this, right? The more important thing is to begin to say no. And then after you say that, I would go back and do an evaluation process on that. I will go back and say, okay, what are the things that worked in this situation? What are the things that didn't? And how am I going to do this differently next time? So then we take this, like what Plowman says, we take this small situation, very specific situation, and we are recognizing the larger potential that it holds for us in our life to become that sturdy place of authority within ourselves and not asking permission. And if you want to know that evaluation, there's a link. I wrote an article for the December Georgia Bar Journal, and I'll get Amber to put the link for what that evaluation is, because there's some specific things, like always list what went right before you go to what went wrong. There's positive psychology reasons for that. So then you just do trial and error. Now, here's a practical thing, especially I am the mother of 3 boys, ages 21, 19, and 18. The easiest thing is a firm and sturdy no. If I explain too much, it's just like, think about it. If you're cross-examining your witness, every defense lawyer is like, yes and no is a perfectly acceptable answer. Anytime they go to explain something, there's an opportunity for a follow-up question. So just know, the more that you explain, you're opening the door to opportunity for follow-up questions. So be prepared for that. If you're going to explain, be prepared for the follow-up questions that you're going to get.
Okay, we have a couple more anonymous questions. First one, do you have any advice around assuming that I am responsible for responding to last-minute requests that may be asked of a larger group?
Okay, can you repeat that for me, Amber?
Sure. Do you have any advice around assuming that this person is responsible for responding to last-minute requests that may be asked of a larger group? So I'm guessing this person may be on a team,
okay,
and feels responsibility for responding.
Okay, so the place I would start for that is with your assumption. And I would question that assumption. Is it true? Am I the only one in the group responsible for responding to last-minute requests? Is that a specific job that has been delegated to me that I accepted, or is it something that I subconsciously volunteered for as an overfunctioner or an helper? So really question that assumption. And I love that you use that word assumption, because it always makes me laugh, because I don't know if anybody went to Georgia Law School and had Professor Blunt for tax, but he always said, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So that is just something that makes me giggle. I like to have a lightness or a sense of humor here. So that just is like, oh yeah, if I've assumed it, let me question it. Is it true? And then, is it working out for you? Let's say it is something that's been assigned for you. That doesn't mean you have to be that person forever. You can try it out, and you can, after you've held that position for a while, you can ask for other help, or say, we need to divide the labor here in a different way. And sometimes, if it hasn't, it's interesting to see, going back to this, where I shared for you when, in talking to the people who asked me to serve on a board or a committee, and I say, if I don't step in, someone else will. Sometimes, again, if it's in the appropriate situation, you can just stop stepping into that position and see if somebody else does, right? You can kind of test the waters a little bit. Let's see. Someone asked, do you have a professional way to tell a client that you can't do their task immediately, i.e. when you have several clients that should have their task completed first? Okay. This is where I think communication comes into play. As you know, much as you can explain up front your availability to your clients or how you will respond to their questions, the better, right? If you tell them, I will generally respond to your question within 24 hours, or if they ask you something and you have other things that are pressing, the ability to communicate to them immediately, hey, I've gotten your request. I've got X amount of things here. I will be able to get you your request by Y date, and then begin to open a conversation with them as to whether that is, you know, an option in this situation. And if not, helping to find someone else to do it. Because remember, you are one person with 24 hours in a day. And so you haven't figured out a way to clone yourself yet. And you have to figure out how to ask for help or to have some backup plan. And maybe that's another way of planning, like you have someone that can help in those situations as well. But what I find is we train people how to treat us. And the more you can take a proactive approach, you will find that there's a lot more understanding on the other side than you might be assuming there is. So let me know if that was helpful for you.
I have one more anonymous question, and this may be one of the last ones that we can take. When you work in a department with a culture of last-minute emergencies, in quotation marks, with real consequences, how do you start to change the culture? The example given, it's almost like, quote, the little children will not have food to eat if you don't handle my emergency, even though it would require this person to disregard the rules and timelines.
So I think that it always starts with ourselves on how to change the culture. Being the person who's willing to do something different, or just even to start the conversation, right? Being willing to, at lunch, start a conversation. I notice this is getting to be a habit, and beginning to just consider what the real effects are for having that type of culture. Is that type of culture really producing the results that we want at the highest and best level? So just really beginning a conversation, which is just how this started today, right? I shared with you, like, just noticing we were just kind of doing some last minute things, and everybody was like amazing in it. And but is there a way that we could give ourselves permission to do it differently that would be more aligned with the culture we're trying to create? So allow it to be slow. Whenever we're changing culture, it's slow going, but just beginning the conversation and just doing it with yourself and getting some traction, and then you can start the conversation with some people. You know, like when I did my year of no. Oh, I'm taking a year of no. I mean, that's what I'm talking about at lunch with my friends. Or, you know, you just start to plant the seeds. Now, that being said, if it really is a stressful situation and it's not aligned with you, you might want to begin to look for a different situation to work in, right? Like actively find a place that's a better fit for you if that is debilitating for you. So you have to, you know, check in with yourself. And I'm going to put a plug in right now that just reminded me for the Use Your Six. This is a great area to use your six in. You know, if you have a challenging situation or challenging culture, call that 800 number. You have 6 prepaid sessions. And if you'd like some help in walking through it, this would be a great kind of thing to do that, right? Especially if you're feeling triggered by saying no to someone else, there may be some other things to be unpacked there that can help you move you to feeling good about it. Plowman,
Okay,
do you want to?
last question?
Last question.
If we have time, do you want to take one last question?
I'll take one last question.
Okay. This person says, is there a good way to say no to a judge who wants you to drop everything anytime they ask you to come to court? This person says, in this case, my office is in the courthouse, so it often appears as if I'm available at the drop of a hat, though I'm really not.
Okay. Again, you're in your situation and you have to assess for yourself the level of emergency and the level of responsiveness that is appropriate. But think about the times when you're not physically there. This may be helpful for a helpful exercise for you, right? If you think about the times where you're not physically there, you can't be available. Now, this is a bit of a dramatic example, but I'm just going to throw it out there. There are a number of golf courses now that will not allow you to have your cell phone on the golf course. I live in Augusta, Georgia. The Masters is coming up. You cannot take your cell phone to the Masters. There are situations where we're not, we're being available or unavailable. Again, if you communicate it to the person is appropriate. So, you might want to consider batching all those requests from that judge if it's possible. Could you, batch? Could you always have a time of day that you're available? To the extent that you have control of your own schedule and you can begin to shape that for yourself, give it a try. Give it a try and then evaluate, come back and evaluate it again. So this begins to be about setting professional boundaries so you can get your other work done. If you're always at the beck and call of someone and you can't get your work done, then there's an assessment, a reassessment of that needs to take place.
That's all the questions that I have.
All right. Plowman, do you have anything that you want to close with or point out or offer?
What I wanted to build on, and again, thank you for bringing this up, is the necessity for looking for support in creating a different and new habit that in the beginning inevitably will be uncomfortable. So there's just no way around that as we're creating these new neural circuits in our brains. There will be physical discomfort in our bodies. And so I love that you mentioned Use Your Six as one form of support. But there could be other forms of support that we can call on. There could be friends or colleagues with whom we actively choose to engage in this conversation and even brainstorm on some strategies that might be appropriate to try. Or maybe, the next time I try something and it backfires, at least I have someone to call. And then I don't feel that my world is ending because I have some support. Someone will be able to look at that situation, not just from my emotional involvement in it, but also from their perspective. I think that mentioning the need for support as we try all of these things is really great. And I'm very grateful that you offered us to engage in this conversation, because the mere number of colleagues who have shown up today, which by the way is our largest attendance so far for the Touch events. So that speaks both to the power of the topic and the relevance, but also to the need, how pressing this need is in our profession to be able to say no in a safe way that helps everyone, actually, even the people whom we might assume do not ever want to hear no. But what happens when we test that assumption?
Yes.
What opportunity does that open up for them?
It's so true. And, you know, I hope that gives hope to, you know, the question, especially the person who's in a culture, you know, there may be more people there that are interested in changing the culture than just you, right? Like, let this be encouraging to you that so many people showed up for this call, and you can share the link for this with the other people in your office. You know, you could have your own lunch thing in your office or your firm and show these Touch event videos. I think, don't you think, Amber and Plowman? I mean, that's part of what they're designed to do. And if you wanted to give it, we talked about, if you wanted to give yourself this 30-day challenge, personal challenge, we'd love to hear back from you, like what pre-decision that you've made for yourself, right? Where are you going to say no, and how that goes for you. And then that will help us formulate more content and more support for you as our committee to do that. And so, Amber, did you have a specific way that
to give feedback? If you'd like to post it on social media and use the hashtag #LawyersLivingWell, we'll be able to see and retweet and share your responses. If you'd love to send in something anonymously, you can email me at amberr@gabar.org. Whatever is the best channel for you to submit that information, but feel free to engage with us on social media. We'd love to see you there. You can tag the State Bar of Georgia, but specifically that Lawyers Living Well hashtag is the best way to do that.
And that reminds me, I was supposed to get a survey together. So we'll put a survey together too for you to respond if you want to give us some specific feedback. But it was great, everybody. I really appreciate you showing up today. It's been such a pleasure. And please feel free to direct any questions my way as well. So thank you.